Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining another Growth Acceleration Partners webinar. First, I'd like to give you a brief overview of our company. GAP, as we often call it, is a technology solutions company that provides an exceptional experience in digital transformation, software solutions, and data through our world-class consulting and engineering teams. This webinar is part of our Leadership Summit. Today, Kenneth Rivera will be presenting the topic Thinking Critical, Strategic, and Analytical. With over 25 years of experience, Kenneth is the Vice President of Engineering at Growth Acceleration Partners, who thrives on leading high-performing teams, fostering an environment of collaboration, and driving strategic initiatives. His expertise spans diverse areas, including sales, cloud technology, development, IT, and finance. He holds a degree in information systems and an MBA in finance, showcasing his commitment to both technical excellence and leadership. So, Kenneth, we are ready to hear you. The stage is all yours.
All right. First of all, thank you very much, Christian, for the intro. And I wanted also to share a little bit of me as well. And I know we're talking about leadership topics, but one thing that you cannot separate is the person from what we're doing. And as you heard, my name is Kenneth Rivera, but I wanted to talk about the other part, which is what I do. What motivates me for a second is I'm a lover of culture, diverse cultures. I enjoy traveling and talking with different perspectives, different people around the world that nurture that perspective that I have. I also practice a lot of photography in my free time. So if you're not seeing me working, most likely I'll be having a camera with me. And I think that's important because one of the things that I wanted to give you from the beginning is leadership is something that doesn't necessarily happen overnight. It's something that you develop. Like my life is around many things. You can apply leadership to many things. And this is something that I'm going to talk in this webinar is what is the mindset to kind of face life. And that could be applied disregarding if you are in management positions or in your daily, everyday life. And actually, I'm going to give a couple of examples for that at the end. So again, the topic is very broad. It's critical, strategic, and analytical thinking. And first of all, the one thing that I wanted to share is for this topic, actually, each of the areas, you can make a whole PhD thesis around what is the subject, right? So in this webinar, it's not gonna define if it's true or not, if it's valid or not. We're gonna talk more about the mentality that you need to have in order to use this framework to think through the problems. Because at the end, something that I wanted to leave you is with some perspective, a different mindset, and a different set of questions to practice. And I wanted to start with a different kind of a story, right? And I wanted to share something really good that one of the coaches that I work actually shared with me. Many years ago, John was telling me a little bit about this perspective that we as a humans sometimes doesn't question enough what we do. And one of the things that he asked me in one of the coaching sessions is talking about, hey, who taught you how to walk or run? And I thought that was a weird question, right? Because yeah, obviously, like I know how to work, I know how to run, but I never really thought about deep enough who taught me that, right? Like, and going back to that, that's observation in little kids. You notice that we just learn how to walk, right? But then later on in life, we realize that it's not the same to walk, to run a sprint, or to run a marathon, right? It's different skills. Actually, with my limited abilities to run, if I decided to run a marathon, I probably will get a different kind of experience, not very pleasant, because I don't having the right exercise, the right training to run a marathon. And the same way it applies. We need to learn how to run all the time in order for the different disciplines. And you can see it in the recent Olympics, how many sports there are in different kind of thinking, right? In different kind of aspects of running 100 meters, 400 meters, a marathon, walking. There's actually a sport that you can do walk at a very fast speed. So we need to practice that. And with that mentality, he asked me, is exactly the same with the brain. We never thought about who taught us how to think, right? And it's a weird question if you think about it. You start to think, hey, how do I think, right? And this is the angle that I'm bringing this into this conversation is thinking skills don't just happen, right? Like it's not that one day I wake up and hey, I'm thinking this way. No, it's to be consistent, to be intentional, the way that you exercise that thinking, right? Actually, a lot of the researchers take many years to develop their way of thinking in order to analyze problems, in order to come to conclusions, in order to prove theories and theses. And it's exactly to what we need to do. And we're going to talk about the different kind of thinkings, at least these three, and how they play together into the way we analyze problems. And the first thing that I wanted to do is kind of describe what is the different thinkings, right? Because I've been high level, but how does this apply? Before we jump into the descriptions, I want you to imagine like every time you're thinking in certain perspective, you're wearing a hat, right? Like right now I'm wearing this hat and I'm going to see the view of the problem from this angle. So strategic thinking is more like a way to say when I'm wearing that hat of a strategic, where I'm heading, what is my final destination, what is my long-term plans, where I'm heading. And this is the view, if you think about it, I always try to describe it. Imagine that you are right now in a forest and you somehow wants to elevate yourself to see not the trees, but rather the whole forest and see where's the path. That is your strategic thinking. That kind of thinking actually makes you wonder if what the path that you're choosing is the right one, and also help you to define if this is the strategy is going right. Some people, and this is something that we need to exercise, when they are in the forest, they cannot take a pause to actually see the whole forest from above. And we need to wear that hat from moment to moment and to adapt to the circumstances. That is why many explorers, many people who practice that, they actually look for lookouts in the nature. So they can see a vantage point and they can say, okay, this is the path that we need to choose. That is strategic thinking. Analytical thinking is a little bit more down to the focus. And for persons like me, I'm very detail oriented. I love to break down information. I love to break down problems. So probably if you think about it on this hat, imagine yourself with a looping view and start looking in a microscope. What is in here? And the whole idea of this kind of thinking is I'm gonna put attention to details. I'm gonna going to recollect information. I'm gonna study patterns, how this information relates to this other information. I'm gonna try to understand if this happens, this also happens, and I can see the patterns around what I'm doing. The other part is this is a kind of thinking that will force you to bring data to the table. It's very difficult to be analytical without something to analyze. And at the same time, if you are too much into this thinking, you will get so fixed into the details that you will lose the focus of the big problem. This is something that typically a lot of academics go and make studies around large volumes of data to analyze and to describe. My way of thinking is sometimes you need to drill down details, sometimes you need to back down. And the third kind of thinking that we're going to discuss is the critical thinking. And critical thinking, if you like to see it, is the what. Is it really that information accurate? Is it the one that will pose those difficult question? What I'm seeing, is it true or not? Why? What evidence do I have? What information do I see? What assumptions do I have? What biases do I have when I collect that information? Right? Is evaluate that information and question the nature of the information that you get and question those conclusions. And as an example, something that very a lot of people when critical thinking happens is that you start to question your own assessments, right? Like, hey, I described that the situation is the best. Okay, let me make a pause and understand if that statement is true. Is it really the best path? And you start to analyze multiple paths. And the way to think about it, and I always like to describe it in this way, is the strategic thinking is the why am I doing it? The analytical thinking is the how, is the what, a little bit on the data, looking at the details. And this is the what. This is the reason that you wanted to analyze if your assumptions, your next steps are real. And with that mindset, you can start shifting your perspective from one angle to another. This is very interesting in the sense that if you start to think about switching hat, it's exactly like my analogy with walking or running. You need to start to exercise multiple times this kind of thinking in order to become good at it. because it doesn't happen just at once. It's actually a habit, a behavior that you have in order to see the problems. And we're going to run in a couple of examples in a few where you can use that kind of thinking. But before that, I wanted to talk about tools, right? Because we're talking about the different kind of mentality that you need to have, the mindset. But what are those tools? A couple of those tools, and by the way, this is not a huge comprehensive area. You can start analyzing. There are many tools. These are some of my favorites. And when I say tool, is kind of like a framework that you can investigate online, and you will see that makes you put the information in a certain way to analyze it. One of my favorites, for example, is the SWOT analysis. It's actually strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it's a tool that forces you to see what are the from your idea, from your perspective, from your situation, what you can do better, what you can capitalize while doing better, what are those opportunities that perhaps you can capitalize even more, and on the other side, what are the threats? And I like to think about that everything that you have on a plan will have some risk, and that's the risk analysis. This is one of the tools that, if you start to use consistency, will help you to understand data in a more consistent way. One other of my favorite ones is the mind maps. Mind maps is typically something like this, where you start to map out concepts from one point to another and start to see which relates to what. It's very useful for very complex problems where you need to understand multiple information. Typically, for example, that I work related with projects, it's very useful to see which part of the application, which part of the problem socialize with who. Also, something else that I do is who is relation with who. If I talk with this person, who can influence in the other side? And that helps me to have a really map of the situation. It's very strategic, and at the same time, you can drill down to the details. The one other of my favorite, and by the way, this is perhaps the one that I use the most for my critical thinking, is the scenario planning. Typically, I run multiple scenarios in my head. Okay, based on the situation, what happens if this materialize? And I start to run through the scenario. As an example, let's say that you are in a trip in your vacations and you plan to take a train from one point to another. And suddenly the scenario says, what happens if I miss the train? What is my second best option? Do I know if I have a second option? Okay, what do I do in those situations? And you can start writing up those information around it. That will help you to understand if you have a solid plan. And at the same time, you can understand what will happen if those scenarios materialize. Some scenarios you cannot never ever let them materialize, because then the consequences is too big. Like, for example, I need to return from Japan to Costa Rica, and suddenly I miss the flight. There's a huge impact in time, money, and everything. So if I cannot move that, the best next thing is I can plan to get earlier, because I don't want to have any kind of problem getting to the airport. And scenario planning is really good because you can use it behind, and you can also after. One of my favorite ones that I described with a couple of my teammates long ago is that I like to do self-sabotage. And self-sabotage is actually another technique where you start to think your plan, your problem, and you go in and say, okay, let's imagine that whatever my plan fail. What fail and why? And you start to put it into the future of that plan and trying to understand the reasons behind it. What are the areas that you consider like a risk? And you start making more plans for that. The next one that I like to talk a little bit in finance, and is very useful, is making a cost benefit analysis. Cost benefit analysis is pretty much putting the cons and the pros. A lot of people don't do that for taking decisions. If you will see all my big decisions in life, I actually make a 30 minutes time just to analyze what is the pros and the cons of that decision that I'm going to take. And it could be material, or it could be something that is a life changing. Even, for example, switching jobs is something that I do a cost benefit analysis. I don't take it lightly. I analyze, okay, what do I have? What am I gaining? What am I losing? Right. And it's a way of thinking, very analytical, and at the same time, very strategic. So this is a couple of the tools that you can start using, and you will find definition templates in online. I don't mean to put specific templates in your head. The important part is that you understand that for canon thinking, will have many tools available for your disposal. The one thing that you need to understand and trying to find is what's the tool that is going to fit the problem that you're having. So with that, one of the big questions that when I was doing this presentation, I actually pop up and I discussed with many of my close friends is, okay, let's say that I have a problem, which is the best or the most effective decision-making mechanism, right? My conclusion and something that I wanted to share with all of you is that you can use multiples, and in fact, you should use multiples. Just getting into one will let you some blind sight in some others. And the more you exercise that, the better that you will gonna become because you're gonna have more elasticity when it comes to making the decisions. So a little bit of a strategy going again is, hey, long-term vision. Okay, let's use that. Analytical. Okay, let's details. And critical. Is it true? Is it not? So I'm going to run to a couple of examples, real life. Some are going to be very basic. And at the end, I would love to know if you have particular questions, things that you wanted to investigate a little bit more, that you wanted to plan. But the whole idea of this is to run through those examples in the way of thinking. So with that, let's imagine this scenario. And this is something that happens as leaders. Often we need to propose or introduce a new process, a new technology, make an organizational change, but you encounter resistance all around, right? And I would like to actually put myself into this situation like many months ago when we were planning different structure, different change, right? Like the way of thinking is that you need to divide the problem into multiple phases, right? And you need to make a bigger team part of that. But there are some key questions that you need to understand and analyze. One of them is on the strategic thinking is how this initiative aligns to the overall strategy of the company, right? One of the big things that you need to understand is put that hat and say, okay, if I wanted to go faster into the future, which changes do I need to do? How is this aligned? This is putting my strategic hat in. And the way that I was describing, again, imagine that you're going above the tree, the forest, and you start to see if this is aligned where the rest of the company wants to get, right? Because in the long run, you can make a really big change that is not aligned to the company, and that will fail. The second one is how can I communicate the benefits of that and going up to the tools that I just described, making a cost benefit analysis to have I thought with the rest of my team around that change? Does it mean that I can explain what are the pros, what are the cons on this situation? Can I bring that particular perspective to the table? Can I communicate it well enough? And that is the part of a strategic thinking. And actually, something that I highly recommend is document that part, making sure that you have those questions aligned, written, discussed with all the key stakeholders, sorry, of the discussion, so you can bring that to the table to add more information to the rest of the people. Because at the end, what you wanted to know is if you have resistance, is because you haven't communicated well enough what you're doing. Then immediately I started to think, okay, this is my strategy. This is where I wanted to go. This is the part that is my direction. Let's take a minute to talk to think critical, right? Is I'm getting pushback right now. Is the concerns valid? Did I miss something? And this is the part that sometimes as leader we question ourselves, but it's good. Question ourselves is not bad. It's just a perspective to understand if what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing is valid, right? The other part is, did I miss something? Is there underlying issues that I haven't discussed, that I haven't attacked? And the last part is there a lack of trust? Perhaps it's not the change itself, it's that people don't understand and do not trust that into the change. And typically something that you would like to do is, again, having honest conversations around the information that you can think. And this is the part where you bring your analytical thinking, right? Okay, that list of risk, rewards, and benefit, can I modify something? Can I talk with the team in a different way around it? What information can I get? Can I do service? Can I get some one-on-ones? Can I do focus groups with the individuals so I can understand their perspective? So this is a real example that happened to me, and I'm going to describe my way of thinking. I'm going to describe the situation for you. A couple of years ago, we were switching an execution model in the company where we're executing projects certain way, and then we wanted to do it in a different way. The first thing that I noticed is that a lot of the team members were having pushbacks on the idea of changing. And I had to step up and kind of use the different hats to kind of resolve the situation. And the first thing that I tried to put myself into is, am I thinking this strategically correctly, right? Is this heading in the right direction? And I got some feedback from different leaders of the organization. Hey, am I going in the right direction? Are we pushing the team towards the end goal? And the reason was yes. So strategic, align, check. So let's think down on the analytical part. And I realized the only way to talk with the different individuals is to get their direct feedback. So I started to organize focus groups on that area. Like, hey, grab 2, 3 persons and have different groups. Hey, I wanted to open feedback. What do you think? Why do you don't like around this new process or these new initiatives? And you can start painting the picture with data, and you realize, okay, it's a little bit of information. They don't have enough details. Perhaps they see the picture different than we see it. Okay, now my critical thinking comes on. Hey, are their concerns valid? And I realized that after having uh, the the change explained, we miss an important part in the communication. It was what's in it for them. Why is important the change for them? And we organized a couple of sessions with the different team leads, like, hey, we're going to explain this part to the rest of the team. Does it make sense for you? Is this attack some of the concerns that you have here from your team? Uh, Bottom line, and that happened like 5, 6 years ago, the change took a long time, but I honestly understood that the concern the team was having was valid. The only thing that we needed to add is more information to the table. And I wanted to bring this example because it was painful, but at the same time, for me, it was very enlightening in the fact that a lot of what we're doing can be resolved with just switching your perspective. If I would have stuck just in the strategic thinking and not thinking about the other parts, about the data, about the information, about the benefits, probably and most likely the change will not be effective because I will be stuck just on the vision and not on the actual ground and the implementation. Another example that I have, and this is something that happens every day. Actually, there are projects and projects go wrong, and typically on the projects, you have multiple competing projects that you have limited budget, people, staff, time, resources. This is very typical in every organization. Actually, in your own life, this is very typical. You have more projects than the resources available to resolve them, right? And going again, I'm going to use my strategic hat for a second. Prioritize and understanding what are the priorities on this project is critical, right? What is the importance of those projects? Can sometimes projects can be delegated to other groups, to other members, to other person, right? In the critical thinking is evaluate the resource. Hey, do I have the right people in here? Do I have the right amount of people in this project? Could we automate some tasks now that we have AI and that we have tools? Could we apply some smart thinking instead of just labor? Could we negotiate tasks with the different resources and adjust timelines? Or in the analytical hat, is it right estimated the right amount? What is it running over there? And the other part is, can we inform and use information to make a decision data making? And let me just describe this example that happened to me. It was 10 years ago, we run into a problem. I was running an organization that provided support to Outlook Exchange mailboxes, right? And it was a company that provided support for 250,000 mailboxes. And one day we started to notice that the mailboxes were definitely running slow and we were losing data. So the first thing, and I jump into my analytical hat with the team is, okay, how we analyze what is happening with the hard drive, how we analyze what is happening with the servers. And then my strategic thinking, hey, are we having the right amount of importance in this project? Is the organization understanding the right priorities with those upgrades that we're doing? And in the critical thinking, could we be that something is failing? Could we say that something is missing in the configuration, in the setup? And at the end of the day, the mix of them kind of led me to analyze that the hard drives were slow because there was too much load that required better hard drive in order to have better infrastructure. This way of thinking took a longer turn, and we have to join with many architects in different areas. But in the long run, we end up replacing the infrastructure for faster hard drive. The problem wasn't that we didn't have the enough number of servers or that we have the right configuration. It was that the hard drives were really slow for the amount of data that was writing into those disks. And this is an example that if you attack the problem with just one area, most likely you will miss the bigger picture, right? Or in this case, the specific details. The analytic thinking in this example was the one that helped me to understand with the rest of the team that the problem wasn't in the strategy, the problem wasn't in the configuration, the problem was in the specific, how much data can the servers actually process. Another
Hey, Kenneth.
of the tip, yes.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. We have a question in the chat, and I wanted to read it for you before
Sure.
we move forward. Okay. So Camila says, do you think that critical thinking can be taught? Meaning like can you teach critical thinking? And if yes, do you have any tactics that you can share for doing so?
Just by the way, I think all of us have critical thinking. The difference is that we don't exercise it very often. Critical thinking is the part that we question what we see. And going back, perhaps let me jump a little bit to put the critical thinking is to see the data or the information that you have with different set of eyes. And typically what you can do is try to think from a different perspective. What will somebody else see from this information? What will somebody else analyze with fresh eyes on this? Question assumptions, like in that sense, is what am I'm assuming? Is that the right thing? For instance, let me just describe an example of that. Here in Costa Rica and perhaps in Colombia and some more parts of Latin America, when you're starting to see rain, you don't question the clothes that you're going to wear because the temperature is going to be about right? If you see raining in the northern hemisphere in Seattle, probably you need to put extra clothes, extra weather because it's going to be really cold. The part that you need to wonder and you need to start asking is, what are my assumptions? My assumption is I'm from Costa Rica, so rain is warm. No, you need to start questioning those assumptions. So yes, it can be think, but more than taught to you is to actually exercise it. Actually put yourself into a different situation, different angle to see the problem from a different perspective.
Thank you, Kenneth. And also we have raised hand by itself. I think we're gonna give you permissions to open the mic.
It's a
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Oh, okay. No worries. So Kenneth, we can continue.
okay, awesome. Oh, I wanted to run to a couple more examples, and perhaps then we can open to some ideas, some perspective, and perhaps if you have questions on your own, we can go through some of the problems that might be interesting. And one of my favorite ones that is another of the example. This happened every day. This is, I will have to say, out of all the problems that we resolve, this is the most typical one. Like, hey, our project, the scope that we have keeps expanding, right? Like, oof, and I don't know about you, but every single area from human resources, finance, technology, IT, this tends to happen, right? Like project scope is something that as much as we wanted to keep it contained, it will always be shifting, changing around. So how do we approach those kind of perspectives? Going again to my strategic thinking, right? The first question that I always ask is, hey, can we prioritize deliveries? Is it the right thing to focus? Are we focusing on the most important ones that will get us to the finish line? The second part that I always think is, what are the risks in communicating to my management, right? Like, hey, are we gonna get it? Are we not gonna get it? What we can get? And this is very interesting because just asking that question will frame the problem in a different way. In the critical thinking department, if I switch hats, is, hey, is this new thing that I just find out truly necessary? Can I say that those things that I'm discussing are something that I need to be happening right now? Can we put it later in the time? Can we not do it at all? What is it about those new requirements? If the requirement comes from external sources, I always ask, hey, can we push back on those requirements, right? Because it could be that our plan is on track, but we're adding more things that make it unnecessary? Can we suggest alternatives? If we cannot push it back or move it into the future, can we suggest a different path of execution? The third one, could we negotiate for additional help? Additional help do not necessarily means more resources. It could be that we need to talk with somebody else to persuade, to change a little bit the scope. Can we talk with our project stakeholders to kind of scope different the project? Those are the critical thinking. And going back to the analytic, which is looking at the little detail, is okay, let's imagine that we cannot get out of this. The scope is the scope. Can we break it into smaller parts? Sometimes the problem is too big because we're not seeing the details, right? Can we see the small tasks, the small details? Can we do an analysis, take a pause into the project and actually deep dive? Okay, and the other part is it, can we track the progress and see the roadblocks, right? In our parts, can we analyze what we're doing and perhaps doing it differently? And I tend to think on projects, typically the resources are limited, but the creativity is unlimited, right? Like the ways that we can analyze and find new paths is something that we as leaders need to question ourselves. I wanted to bring a real example of this. And typically, for example, right now we have a discussion with a project that definitely we see that the customer would like us to do something extra, right? Like a new requirement, something additionally. The way that we analyze is, first of all, we did a SWOT analysis and we see, okay, is this a threat or this is an opportunity? Okay, this is an opportunity. We have the opportunity to present the customer a different plan, increasing the scope of the contract, increasing the commitment and the work that we're doing with them. So we don't need to see it like a threat. This is an opportunity to present a new business with them. At the same time, we see it as a risk on the timeline, because if we don't disclose those deliverables with the customer, we might derail the final delivery. So definitely it's a risk situation. But at the same time, could we do something different? Not necessarily we need to do it right now. We can do it later, or we can move some parts of the project that we're doing right now and negotiate an exchange of value, so we can say, okay, we're going to reach to this part of the project and this other later. These are the kind of questions that we went through the team to make not only one but multiple alternatives, so we can talk with the customer. Typically, this is one of my favorite alternative. We run through a scenario planning with the team and we say, okay, let's imagine that this materializes, how we can execute it. And we start to generate multiple scenarios of the project. Okay, imagine if we add 3 resources, what do we do? Imagine if the customer negotiate to extend the project 3 more months, how will we do it? Imagine if the customer would like to add more resources right now, what do we do it? This allow us to see what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Actually, some of the, to give you some of the actually responses that we got, we saw some scenarios that it looks very good on paper, but if you try to run it in the real life, it doesn't make any sense, right? So let's not offer that to our customer. Let's say that, imagine that we can add, I don't know, 20 new computers tomorrow to work on this problem. Is it really feasible to have 20 new computers tomorrow? No, perhaps we can add them in December. Okay, perhaps in December we can do it. That's more realistic. And that's when you start to think. This kind of thinking applies to many areas of what we do. Another example of this kind of thinking is, recently we were doing some migrations of services to the cloud, right? And we realized that the scope that we have for the project was suddenly bigger because we oversee this part, right? And this was happening internally with the IT discussions that we wanted to move some services. And we realized these other 2 big parts are interconnected with all this. So we cannot migrate this without this. At the end of the discussion, we realized we have 2 alternatives. Either we do it right now and we run the risk of migrating something bigger that we're not planning for, or we replan and we push it forward. And this is where we negotiate with our different internal teams and put some of those priorities, perhaps not for right now, for later, so we can do it better. And this is the kind of analysis that we did. Of course, this all happens in multiple discussions. It's not like, hey, we were sitting thinking and suddenly we came with all the answers. We need to analyze what's good, what's bad, what are the opportunities, and what are the risks. This is where some of that particular thinking will help you. And one of the last things that I wanted to share is, okay, something personal because, like I mentioned at the beginning, this kind of thinking applies to a lot of things in your area, in your personal life, in the way that you see the world, and it will help you to navigate your life. So actually, I took inspiration of this one with one of the managers that worked with me. We were talking actually last week, and I thought about adding this particular example. Let's say that you want to take a vacation, right? But we all know vacations are expensive, it takes budget, and I need time, right? Like that. Those are things that often we don't have unlimited, sadly. So how can I plan my vacation? Some people, I remember my sister, for example, she doesn't like to plan vacations. She does like to take a resort and have all inclusive and take the work off her hands because she just wanted to rest. That's a great alternative. And I like to bring it to the other side. What if you don't want that? What if you want to kind of dip into the toes and make a plan? So the strategic thinking will first of all ask you, hey, what kind of vacation do I want to have, right? If you saw some of my pictures at the beginning, I like to hike, for example. I like to take photographs. I like to explore new culture. So this is the kind of vacation that I'm looking for. Experiences, a little bit of adventure, a little bit of outdoor. I don't mind getting wet. So you need to understand if you like or not those kind of things. The second one is, what kind of budget do I have? I can plan the most fantastic vacation, but if it's too expensive, perhaps I'll not be able to execute it. So having a clear budget, how much money do I have, will help me to set up my goal, right? Like, hey, I want to invest $1,000 in my vacation. Okay, that's fair. How many days? 4 days. Okay, that will help you define, drill down to a specific details of that. Then the critical thinking kicks off, which is, okay, how I consider everything. Let's say that I like to hike, but am I going in the right season of the year? Am I going in winter and I cannot hike? Can I go uh, in summer to a desert and I cannot hike either? So I need to understand that. I need to understand the weather. I need to understand also the kind of clothing that I need to take to the vacation and the kind of activities that I'm bringing. And those who have seen me work through my vacations, I plan like that. Like I even to the point that I say, hey, what kind of lenses and camera do I bring to this adventure? And it's something internal that I do to understand the information and also make a plan for me and for my wife. And the other one, what kind of restrictions do I have? Like, and this is a true story. I actually some years in the past, I booked a trip to Taiwan, and I totally forgot that Taiwan requires visa for Costa Rica. It totally slipped my mind. I never thought about it, and I realized 3 weeks before my vacation, and I say, "Oh my God, what am I gonna do? I cannot get the visa in 3 weeks." That's something because I never really start drilling down in the critical thinking. Is my assumption that Costa Rica do not require a visa true? I need to go check it. And the last part, the analytical thinking is, okay, now let's say that I know where I'm going, what kind of adventure, what kind of different information do I have for the weather? Okay, let's go down to a specific. First, is it within the price range that I'm looking for? Are the flights around the price that I can estimate it? Is there any hotels available? Because it happened to me one time that I tried to go to a place that there was a big festival, a music festival, and there was no hotels around, right? Like, so I need to check if there's actually a hotel before I book my flight. Are the activities that I'm going to do something that I wanted to do? And that happened to me as well. I wanted to see some kind of flowers in the desert that only happens in spring. So I need to go a specific time frame to actually see those flowers. And the other part is going down to information. I can seek videos online, understanding what I'm doing, so I can take informed decisions and make an itinerary. So all that thinking actually gets me to talk with the different persons involved in the trip, so I can make that. And let me make a real example of that. Like this was this year, 6 months ago, I got the opportunity, the privilege to go to Canada to see some of the parks in the Calgary area. And the first thing that we realized is, okay, this is a trip that we can only do as a Costa Rican in summer or a little bit in spring, in autumn, because in when it's cold, it's too cold for us, right? So probably I won't be able to do the hike. So first time of the year, I needed to shrink it down. The second part is what kind of adventure do I want to have? Do I want to have the full resort, all inclusive, like my sister, or do I want to do the adventure one, going outside and camp and do some hikes? Okay, that's the one that I wanted to do. The other part is, are there actually hotels available? Because it's peak season. And so I wanted to understand, am I going to get lodging or not? And then I need to drill down to a specific, what is the route that I'm going to go? Because that area of the map is huge in the world. So that allowed me to bring a sense of the plan and a sense of the thinking. And funny fact, I organized that trip with three of my friends and my wife, and it was a whole adventure. But the adventure was even before we started to travel, right? Like just having these discussions with a group of people was very interesting because then we realized we were having different expectations. One of my best friends was looking for, hey, I don't want to hike 10 hours. Kenneth, what are you talking about? I want to do 2 hours hike. Okay, let's bring down into the strategic because then my kind of thinking was wrong and I needed to align with this other person. Then we realized, hey, where are we gonna eat? Because if we're gonna be 3 hours hiking, are we gonna take food? Can we cook? And suddenly somebody asked me, hey, is there birds in the area? When we realize, okay, we cannot cook, we cannot take sandwiches because there are gonna be birds outside. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to get chased by a huge grizzly, right? So we start to understand, okay, perhaps we need some different time of food. That gets me into having different discussion with different people so I can make a plan that fits all. At the end of the day, just a fun fact, not related to the plan of the trip, but we were having a problem and we need to shift in the middle of the plan to a different location because there was a national, there was some wildfires in the area and we weren't able to go to the road that we wanted. So we end up rethinking everything. And thankfully, we already had a lot of those decisions, a lot of that information already documented, so we can have a discussion with my group of friends in the middle of the vacation. Hey, we cannot go to this area. Can we go to this one? We already researched it and investigated. So we make the change on the plan very smooth just because we have multiple scenarios and that helps us. And of course, every single of those things that I just described take time, take effort, but in the long run, if you are doing it like a habit, it will become second nature to you. And you will be making plans without noticing, analyzing strategically, critical, and analytical. So that's a little bit about what I wanted to present. I like to know if there's particular questions, things that you wanted to talk a little bit with us.
Thank you, Kenneth. For those who have questions, remember you can use the Q&A section or you can raise your hand and we're going to give you permissions to your microphone. So if there are no questions or I don't see any, I don't know if Camila, you see any question on the chat or the Q&A section.
No, not really.
I think someone just asked one. It says, are there any books that you recommend to learn more about the topic?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that I can recommend. For me, the way of thinking is very interesting. I got a couple of ideas from a book. I don't remember the author. Is Think Fast and Slow. It's a book that talks that some decisions on the brain are made by a part that actually refrains on previous experiments, so experiences, sorry, and take the decision really fast. Like those are the habits, the actual fast responses that you do. For instance, when you're driving, you're making a lot of decisions, but they are so automatic that you cannot start even think about it. And a good example of that is when you start driving, the first couple of years or the first couple of months, you are so nervous and you cannot talk with somebody while you're driving. But after a couple of years, you can have a whole conversation, very deep conversation while having a drive is like nothing happens. That book actually teach me a lot of seeing the problem from different angles and sometimes slow down, sometimes back down. So that's a really good book to start thinking about the ways to analyze the problems on a different angle.
All right. Thank you, Kenneth. And there's one more comment, not a question. Keka says thank you very much and greetings. So, oh yeah, Juan Carlos says that Think Fast and Slow was written by Daniel Kahneman
Yeah,
and
Daniel
renowned
Kahneman.
by the psychologist novel. Yeah,
It's an amazing book, by the way. Highly recommend it.
cool. All right, I think those were the questions. I don't see any hands raised. So thank you, Kenneth, for these valuable insights about thinking. And thank you, everyone who joined us for this webinar. We invite you to stay tuned to our social media for future talks that will continue to contribute to our knowledge and professional development. So thank you so much and have a great afternoon.